The repetition of conflict in marriage, a psychological inquiry into the shadow and the soul. Carl Gustav Jung, Zurich, 1950. Part 1. Opening reflection. The alchemy of the everyday. Marriage is often imagined as the meeting of two souls, each seeking warmth and completion in the other. Yet, as anyone who has looked honestly into the depths of a relationship knows, the same warmth that attracts can later burn, and the same mirror that once reflected beauty begins to reveal wounds long hidden. Again and again, the couple finds themselves caught in the same quarrel, rehearsing the same accusations, moving through a labyrinth whose walls seem constructed by an unseen architect. To the superficial eye, such repetition appears as failure, a sign that love has diminished or that the partners are ill-suited. But from a psychological standpoint, such recurrences are not accidents. They are necessities. The psyche has its own teleology, an inner purpose that seeks wholeness, and it will repeat a pattern until consciousness learns what it must. As I wrote in The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious, what we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate. The marital quarrel, therefore, is not mere discord between two egos. It is the expression of a deeper striving within the self to bring the unconscious into awareness through the living crucible of relationship. Every marriage begins as a projected image. We fall not in love with the person themselves, but with the reflection of our own unrecognized soul within them. The young man encounters his anima, his inner feminine, and believes her embodied in the beloved woman. The woman meets her animus, the masculine principle of spirit and logos, and feels him alive in the man before her. Thus, what begins as enchantment is, in truth, a psychological encounter with one's own depths. But projections by their nature are temporary. As the image fades, the real person emerges, often accompanied by disappointment, anger, and the bewildering sense of betrayal. You are not what I thought you were. Yet this is precisely the moment when love begins to descend from fantasy into the earth of reality. The gods withdraw and two human beings remain, called now to the arduous task of seeing not only each other, but also themselves. It is here that conflict arises as an initiatory fire, a kind of alchemical operation in which the opposites, masculine and feminine, spirit and matter, consciousness and unconscious, are forced into confrontation. The quarrel is thus the opus, the work, through which the metals of the soul are refined. It is not that the partners are enemies. Rather, they are instruments of individuation for one another. In Psychology and Alchemy, I observed that transformation does not occur in the absence of conflict but in its very midst. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. The couple who repeats the same argument are not merely circling failure, they are circling a center. Something unredeemed seeks expression. The conflict repeats because the unconscious seeks incarnation. It knocks upon the door of awareness through the most intimate and vulnerable bond we have, love. Marriage, then, is not a static union but a vessel for transformation, a vessel heated by the fire of emotional friction. And so, to understand why couples repeat the same conflicts, one must look beyond behavior into the alchemical depths of the psyche itself, where projection, shadow, and the archetypes weave their ancient patterns through our modern lives. Part 2. Psychological exploration. The shadow, projection, and the anima/animus in marital dynamics. When two individuals unite in marriage, they bring not only their virtues and aspirations but also their shadows. The shadow, as I have written in Aion and Psychological Types, is that hidden, repressed, for the most part inferior and guilt-laden personality whose ultimate ramifications reach back into the realm of our animal ancestors. It is everything one refuses to acknowledge about oneself, and yet, through a strange necessity of the psyche, it insists on being lived, if not by oneself, then through another. In marriage, this other is the partner. The shadow as mirror. What one spouse condemns most vehemently in the other often reveals the disowned aspect of his or her own psyche. The critical husband who scorns his wife's emotionality may himself be possessed by an unacknowledged dependency upon feeling. The wife who despises her husband's rigidity may conceal within herself a craving for structure and discipline. The partner becomes a mirror, reflecting back the rejected contents of the other's soul. And because the ego cannot tolerate this reflection, it attacks the mirror, and thus the quarrel begins. This dynamic explains why certain conflicts recur with almost ritual precision. The husband forgets an appointment, the wife feels unseen. She protests his neglect, he hears criticism, Each believes the other is the problem. Yet what unfolds is a dance of projections. He projects his own fear of inadequacy onto her judgment. She projects her own fear of abandonment onto his aloofness. The outer drama conceals an inner dialogue between two incomplete selves. The shadow cannot be integrated through denial. It demands recognition. As I noted in Aion, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The repetition of conflict is, therefore, the psyche's way of compelling this confrontation. What the ego resists will return again and again until it is seen. Projection and the loss of the soul image. In the early stage of love, each partner gazes through the lens of projection. The beloved becomes a vessel for the inner image, the anima in the man, the animus in the woman. These figures, described in 2 essays on analytical psychology, are not mere personal fantasies but archetypal realities. They represent the bridge between the conscious and unconscious, the intermediator of our relation to the opposite principle within. When a man falls in love, he is seized by the power of the anima, that personification of all that is mysterious, soulful, and alive within him. In the woman he adores, he senses his own depths, the call of his own soul. Similarly, a woman who falls in love is captivated by her animus, the image of strength, wisdom, and spiritual certainty. Each believes they have found completion in the other, yet it is their own inner counterpart that has been awakened. Over time, the projection withdraws. The beloved ceases to carry the numinous glow. Disenchantment sets in. This stage is crucial, for here the partners face the choice between illusion and reality. To maintain the projection is to remain imprisoned in fantasy. To withdraw it consciously is to begin the true work of love. This withdrawal, however, is not peaceful. The anima or animus resists reduction to the merely human. Thus, the partners fight, not simply with each other, but with their own inner gods. The quarrel becomes a contest between archetypes. Feeling against reason, eros against logos, the moon against the sun. In the psychology of the transference, I observed that the projection of the unconscious contents upon the other person creates a process of psychic assimilation and differentiation, which, when endured consciously, leads to transformation. Repetition as a compulsion toward wholeness. Why then do couples repeat the same conflicts? Because the psyche does not rest until its opposites are reconciled. The repetition is not mechanical but teleological, it serves a purpose. Each conflict is an attempt, however painful, to bring the unconscious content into relation with consciousness. The quarrel is the symptom of something wanting to be realized. In this way, marriage functions as an analyst of the soul. Each partner interprets the other, albeit unconsciously, forcing hidden aspects into awareness. The conflict repeats not because the partners fail to learn, but because they are being led, by the deeper intelligence of the self, toward an encounter that has not yet reached completion. The self, that central archetype of order and totality, seeks to unite what is divided. Yet the ego, fearful of dissolution, resists. The result is a cycle of projection, disappointment, and blame. A cycle that will persist until the ego learns to endure the tension of opposites without regression to defense or accusation. This, I have written, is the essence of the coniunctio oppositorum, the sacred marriage of alchemy, where the king and queen, the masculine and feminine principles, undergo mutual transformation in the vessel of the work. Thus, the repetition of marital conflict is not a pathology but a process. It is the soul's attempt to realize the union of opposites, to draw from discord a greater harmony that transcends personal desire. Those who can see the symbolic meaning of their suffering stand at the threshold of individuation, those who cannot remain chained to fate. Part 3: Practical Insight. The transformation of conflict into conscious relationship. When one begins to recognize that marital conflict is not a mere accident of incompatible temperaments, but the manifestation of the unconscious seeking wholeness, a new attitude becomes possible. The couple's quarrel, instead of being treated as an unfortunate interruption to love, may be viewed as the very path through which love must evolve. In the relations between the ego and the unconscious, I wrote that it is not the purpose of therapy to make the patient adjusted to reality, but to make him real. The same holds true for marriage. The task is not to restore a sentimental peace, but to bring each partner into deeper reality, with themselves and with one another. 1. The shift from blame to symbolic understanding. The The first transformation occurs when the couple abandons the literal level of conflict. The ego always insists that the argument is about something: money, household duties, time, fidelity. Yet the literal content is often but the carrier of psychic energy. Beneath the surface dispute lies an archetypal drama: the struggle of the inner masculine and feminine, the meeting of shadow and persona, the longing of the self for integration. To approach the quarrel symbolically is to ask not, "Who is right?" but what is being asked of us by the psyche. The partners may begin to ask, "What in me has been stirred by this?" or "What am I defending?" Such questions break the spell of projection, allowing the energy of conflict to be reclaimed as psychic material for consciousness, rather than fuel for resentment. It is the difference between standing inside a dream, convinced of its reality, and stepping outside to interpret it. Marriage itself is, in a sense, a shared dream, a theater in which unconscious contents seek expression through the other. When one learns to interpret that dream rather than react to it, love begins to mature. 2. The courage to withdraw projections. Projection, as I have often observed, is both the beginning and the obstacle of love. It is the means by which we fall in love, and the very thing that makes love difficult to sustain. The withdrawal of projection is therefore the second transformation. This withdrawal requires great courage, for it entails recognizing that what one has seen, whether divine or demonic, belongs also to oneself. The idealized spouse who once embodied salvation becomes an ordinary, fallible human being. The partner who seemed the source of one's suffering is revealed as the mirror of one's own unlived life. In Aion, I noted that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But for transformation to occur, one must take back into oneself the energy formerly projected onto the other. This act feels at first like loss, for the magical aura of infatuation fades. Yet what is lost in enchantment is gained in consciousness. The love that was unconscious becomes capable of soul. It is through the painful withdrawal of projections that we begin to differentiate the other from the image, and to encounter the person as they are. This marks the end of romantic illusion, and the beginning of authentic intimacy. The couple who can endure this phase enter the second stage of marriage, the coniunctio imperfecta, the imperfect union, where the opposites no longer seek fusion but dialogue. 3. Embracing the shadow together. No relationship can grow without a conscious relation to the shadow. Both partners must come to recognize that the enemy they fight is not the other but their own unconscious. When one learns to say, "This anger is mine," or "This jealousy reveals my own wound," the spell of repetition is broken. In alchemical symbolism, the nigredo, the blackening, marks the stage of dissolution and despair before new life can emerge. Every enduring marriage must pass through this stage, for it is only when the old images of perfection die that something more genuine can be born. Many couples separate at this point, unable to bear the darkness. Yet those who stay, not out of duty but out of the willingness to know themselves, participate in the mystery of rebirth. Mutual confession of shadow, not in a moral sense, but in the psychological sense of acknowledging one's own inner contradictions, becomes the foundation of renewal. It allows empathy to emerge where once there was accusation. The partners begin to see in one another not enemies, but fellow travelers in the same labyrinth. 4. Holding the tension of opposites. Every marriage is a field of opposites. Love and power, closeness and distance, dependence and autonomy, eros and logos. The ego's tendency is to resolve these tensions prematurely, to demand harmony at any cost. Yet true wholeness arises not from the elimination of opposition, but from its endurance. In Psychology and Alchemy, I wrote that, the greater the tension, the greater is the energy of transformation. The greater the contrast, the greater the potential. The couple who can hold this tension consciously, without collapsing into blame or retreat, participate in the alchemical process of transformation. The emotional friction generates psychic heat, and the vessel of relationship becomes the crucible of individuation. This does not mean living in perpetual conflict, but rather living with the awareness that conflict contains meaning. To stand in the fire of feeling without projecting it outward is to allow the opposites to work within. From this, a third emerges, the transcendent function, the symbolic reconciliation that arises from the interaction of consciousness and the unconscious. 5. The marriage as an alchemical vessel. The alchemist spoke of the vas hermeticum, the sealed vessel in which transformation could occur. Marriage, when entered consciously, becomes such a vessel. It holds the heat of emotion, the tension of difference, and the raw material of the soul's base metals: fear, anger, desire, longing. But the vessel must remain sealed. That is, the couple must not flee from the process when discomfort arises. Many marriages fail not because love is absent, but because the partners escape the heat before the transformation completes. If they can endure it, the material of their shared life begins to transmute. Resentment into compassion, blame into understanding, projection into communion. Love becomes not the mere pursuit of happiness, but a religious experience, a confrontation with the numinous depths of the soul. For as Aion teaches, the self reveals itself most powerfully at the boundary between conscious order and unconscious chaos. The marital vessel is that very boundary, where two egos are broken open to the mystery of the greater whole. 6. Individuation within the couple. Individuation does not mean separation from the partner, but differentiation within union. Each must become a whole person, capable of relating not from need or projection, but from inner freedom. The paradox of conscious marriage is that the more each individual becomes themselves, the deeper the bond becomes. This paradox was understood by the alchemists as the coniunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites that preserves distinction. As I wrote in the Psychology of the Transference, the union of the opposites in the transference relationship corresponds to the individuation process. So too in marriage, when the partners cease to demand that the other fulfill what is missing in themselves, they discover a higher form of love, one that includes both solitude and union, both self and other, in living reciprocity. Through such an attitude, the repeating quarrel becomes a teacher. Each recurrence is an opportunity to ask, what aspect of my own soul seeks recognition here? Gradually, conflict loses its destructive power and becomes an instrument of consciousness. The same pattern that once enslaved the couple becomes the means of their liberation. Part 4. Closing wisdom. Love, individuation, and the wholeness of the soul. Carl Gustav Jung, Zurich, 1950. In the end, the story of every marriage is the story of two journeys: the outer journey of two people living, choosing, aging together, and the inner journey of two souls seeking the meaning of love through the mystery of consciousness. When these two paths intertwine, they become the alchemical vessel of transformation, the crucible in which the opposites of human nature are joined, dissolved, and reborn. The outer world calls this relationship. The inner world knows it as individuation through love. 1. Love as the mirror of the self. Love, in its highest sense, is not an emotion but an act of recognition. It is the gaze through which the self sees itself in another. Each soul is a spark of the divine totality that seeks to behold itself mirrored in form. Hence, the longing for union, for to be loved is to be seen, and to see truly is to love. Yet we cannot see the other without first being confronted by our own blindness. The beloved, like the mirror in myth, reveals both beauty and shadow. Narcissus gazed upon his reflection and mistook it for another, yet behind his error lay a sacred truth, that the image he adored was himself. In marriage, each partner lives out this archetype, mistaking projection for reality until the mirror cracks. Only then can the eyes begin to see not merely the reflection, but the reality that lies beneath. To love consciously is to recognize that what we love and what we hate in the other belong equally to ourselves. This awareness does not diminish love, it sanctifies it. For when the opposites within are reconciled, love ceases to be possession and becomes participation in a mystery greater than either person. 2. The spiritual meaning of conflict. Conflict, when understood psychologically, ceases to be an obstacle to love and becomes its servant. Each quarrel, each repetition, each pain reveals something unfinished in the psyche. The very patterns that exhaust the ego are those through which the self attempts to lead us toward completion. In this sense, the partner is not only companion but initiator. The Greek myth spoke of Eros as a god with wings and arrows, a mischievous child whose aim both wounds and awakens. So it is in love. We are pierced so that we might feel, we suffer so that we might see. The arrow of conflict opens the heart to its own depth. When one can say, my suffering has meaning, the pattern ceases to bind. It becomes symbolic, an image of transformation. Thus, marriage fulfills the function that religion once held for many. It becomes the place where the divine works itself out in human form. 3. The alchemy of wholeness. In Psychology and Alchemy, I describe the opus of transformation as a sequence: nigredo, blackening; albedo, whitening; and rubedo, reddening. These phases correspond to despair, insight, and the dawning of new life. Every marriage that endures in consciousness undergoes this same alchemical process. First comes the nigredo, the dark night of conflict and disappointment, when the illusions of perfection die. Then the albedo, the cleansing light of understanding, when projections are withdrawn and truth is spoken. Finally, the rubedo, the reddening, when passion and love are reborn upon a higher plane, no longer naive but tempered by self-knowledge. The marriage that reaches this third stage becomes a living symbol of the conjunctio oppositorum, the sacred union of opposites. In it, eros and logos, man and woman, consciousness and unconsciousness participate in the same divine rhythm. This is not an idealized harmony, but a dynamic equilibrium, a rhythm of distance and nearness, solitude and communion. It is, in essence, the dance of the self with itself. 4. The partner as soul companion, psychopomp. There are few relationships that confront us so directly with the unconscious as the marital bond. For this reason, the partner often functions as a psychopomp, a guide of souls. They lead us, often against our will, into those inner chambers we would rather avoid. The anger, jealousy, or fear we feel in marriage is not caused by the other, but evoked by them for the sake of growth. When we begin to see this, gratitude replaces blame. We recognize that the partner's task is not to make us happy, but to make us whole. Their presence awakens what in us is unfinished, unhealed, unlived. The alchemical marriage, therefore, is not about perfection but about transformation. Two flawed beings refining one another in the fire of encounter. In this way, marriage becomes a shared individuation process, a dialogue between two unconsciouses striving toward consciousness. What is healed in one resonates in the other. What is denied in one reappears in the other, seeking balance. Love itself becomes a form of psychic justice, ensuring that what is hidden in one heart is revealed through the other. 5. Toward a conscious love. A conscious love is born when the ego yields its demand for control and opens to the mystery of the otherness within and without. It recognizes that no human being can fully possess another, for each soul belongs also to the collective unconscious, to the eternal archetypes that move us all. To love consciously, therefore, is to love through the ego, not from it. To see in the partner not an object of need but a manifestation of the divine process of becoming. Such love transcends time and circumstance, for it is rooted not in what changes, but in what is. In Aion, I wrote that the self is our life's goal, for it is the completest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality. When love serves this goal, it ceases to be bound by sentiment alone. It becomes a participation in the unfolding of the self, a human sacrament of divine wholeness. 6. The wholeness of the soul. In the final analysis, all relationships are mirrors held up by the self to the ego. Marriage merely magnifies the reflection, for its intimacy leaves us nowhere to hide. The partner becomes the instrument through which the soul insists on being known. If we accept this, then the repeating conflict, the endless cycle of pain and reconciliation, ceases to be meaningless. It becomes a symbol of the psyche's yearning for unity. Each quarrel, each reconciliation is a small death and rebirth, a descent and return, echoing the ancient mysteries of Osiris and Isis, of Dionysus and Ariadne. Through them, the psyche learns the sacred rhythm of separation and union. The ultimate aim is not perfect peace, but conscious participation in the dance of opposites. For life itself is woven of light and shadow, joy and suffering, love and loss. Wholeness does not exclude the darkness, it embraces it. 7. Closing reflection. And so, when we ask why couples repeat the same conflicts, we may answer, because the soul repeats its lessons until they are learned. Each repetition is a summons from the self, urging us toward greater consciousness. To love another is to enter a mystery larger than the two who love. It is to walk the path of individuation not in solitude, but with a companion who mirrors the infinite within us. Thus, the true purpose of marriage is not happiness, though happiness may come, but meaning. For meaning, unlike happiness, endures through suffering, and it is meaning that transforms suffering into wisdom, and conflict into communion. When we understand this, love ceases to be a fragile emotion and becomes a way of being. A continuous act of seeing and being seen, of dying to illusion and being reborn into truth. In this sense, the alchemical wedding is never concluded. It is an eternal process. The vessel of marriage, heated by the fire of life, refines both souls until they become translucent to the light of the self. Then what was once mere passion becomes compassion. What was once conflict becomes dialogue. And what was once projection becomes recognition, the soul beholding itself through the eyes of another. That, perhaps, is the secret aim of all human love, to make the darkness conscious and through it, to find the wholeness of the soul.